Anyone who believes in indefinite growth on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist.
We don't want to focus politics on a notion that involves the rejection of principles around which a large majority of our fellow citizens organize their lives.
We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you would think.
How do we make the most of our minds over the long term, the life term that we have them? Why does this matter now more than any other time in human history? And what can the Fellowship of the RSA do to help this issue that defines enlightenment in our times? Big questions. And when I was making Look Who's Talking and standing in the hospital delivery room with all these newborn babies, that's the Talking Baby movie if you recall, I had no idea that one day I would desperately need, with my family, to find answers to the first two questions, or that because of my friendship with Ralph Simon, the Fellow of the RSA, I'd have the chance to come here today to ask the RSA to engage in a program of what I call Mind Care, which would be a program integrating the elements that we'll talk about in today's conversation to make the most of our minds. Because come the day that my family and I needed answers to these questions, we find that absolutely nobody tells you everything you need to know. And I like this empty star field because this is the start of the journey in many ways. This looks completely empty, this star field of answers. This is what my parents confronted at the outset of the recovery. But many answers lie in what I call the spaces in between. I want to give a couple of examples of what I mean in order to frame the conversation. When DNA was first broken down, it was broken down in terms of the genes, and we discover that we have about the same number of genes as a fruit fly, a limited number of answers from what's on the gene. But the new research into what's called ENCODE is how the DNA molecule communicates in between itself. There's actually communication going on there. If we go a little bit further with this to make it a little bit less abstract, there's communication going on inside every cell in our bodies between the nucleus of the cell and the cell wall and its neighbor. If you woke up tomorrow morning and your cell phone didn't work, the TV and radio were off, you would go next door. You'd want to find out what was going on. And my suggestion, I call it the lonely cell theory of cancer, is that our individual cells are very similar. That when they lose their sense of context, they can't go next door to ask their neighbor what's going on. They start dividing, they start replicating, which is the beginning of a tumor. And there is lab research that's showing that instead of radiating or chemoing cancerous cells to kill them, it is possible already in the lab to take a cancerous cell and revert its phenotype to normal by restoring its sense of context. And if some of you are being skeptical and thinking, wait a minute, this is crosstalk amongst cells, ask this question: how is it that every cell in your eye knows how to express the color of your eye, and the back of your hand doesn't leap into that same color? There's communication that's going on within. Now, I've had the opportunity, fortunately, to travel the world talking a little bit about these issues of consciousness, because the gap in between that I really am talking about today is the gap between who you think you are and who you would like to be. Now, this gap in terms of mental performance is a widening crevasse into which, as we're going to discuss, whole populations are falling increasingly with time. This is the great threat to enlightenment in our times, and closing this gap between who we think we are and who we can be is going to be a major part of the solution. India is the world capital of head injury, and that's why I was so excited and delighted to be able to speak there. I then went on to speak in North America, equally disastrous numbers. Every 40 seconds there's a head injury in the United States, there's a stroke every 50 seconds or so, and it's the leading cause of acquired disability in North America. But let's come on to Europe. I'm afraid Europe is also in a very serious situation. This agrees with the World Health Organization, who say that 35% of European medical costs are for brain disorders. And to put a number to this appalling situation, 798 billion euros. This is the number given by a group called Gustavson and others in the journal Neuropsychopharmacology. And they evaluated a range of disorders, but what I want to say first is they regard this as the existential threat to European society. They found that this number is double the number it was 5 years previously. So I'm hoping that this will begin to answer the first question I asked, which is why is this issue more important now than at any other time in human history? And here are the areas that the Gustavson team looked at, 19 major disorders comprising over 100 specific disorders. And these include both genetic abnormalities, genetic diseases that compromise consciousness, as well as traumatic and substance afflictions of consciousness. But in all cases, it's a gap between what I call potential mind and actual mind. And the key is to try and close that gap. Now, along the process of my family stumbling through this process, initially they were in charge and they did an incredible job finding these solutions. My parents are here today. One of the clinicians says, gee, I would say that your recovery is a miracle. Certainly my colleague who runs this clinic, and he writes the chapter of the textbook that's used to teach clinicians across America rehabilitation that's used in the medical schools. And I thought that that was so wrong that I decided I'd undertake to write the book that I wish someone had given me at the outset, especially given the prevalence in society of this issue. So let's begin with the thing that actually enables me to walk on this stage today. This is a functional neurostimulator. It is tied in. This is the control unit. It has a more powerful processor than any on your desktop computers. It's linked to an antenna that's clipped to my shoe. And underneath here, you can see is the device. And it's being shown up there on the screen. But the thing I want to communicate is, and there it is, the functional stim travels up the peroneal nerve. It measures how fast or slowly I'm walking, and it delivers electrical stimulation to pick my foot up at the speed I need, apart from recording every detail of every step I take. I really feel like I'm on camera. So now let's embark on the journey of the why of no and the how of yes. This is the template through which I want to explore this journey that I embarked upon. My journey both ends and begins one night on the way to dinner here. This is what used to be my car. What's happened is that a van traveling at 75 miles an hour has run a stop sign, hit the side of my car. It's called a T-bone, a side impact collision. I've been bulldozed across the road to the sidewalk with such force that the car has taken off, and in midair it's hit a tree on the other side of the car, and it's bounced off the tree and landed here in somebody's front yard. Paramedics, on their way home from work, because this is less than a mile from Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, one of the biggest hospitals in LA, which is partly why I'm alive today, they run across the wreck and they pronounce that all the occupants of the car are dead, that I'm dead. But they call a fire engine, and the fire engine brings 2 jaws of life, and they peel apart, they cut the roof off, and they set it to one side, and inside the car, they find that my skull is crushed, my collarbone is crushed, both arms, all but one of my ribs, and my pelvis, but I have a pulse. And they race me to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, one of the biggest hospitals in LA, where I drop into a coma, which brings me to the first C of consciousness, which is cadence. Cadence is rhythm. Our brains have a rhythm. Our hearts have a rhythm. When we write, when we speak, when we walk, when we skip, everything we do has a rhythm. And cadence is the process of learning that rhythm. It is why when babies are born, they can recognize their mother's voice. Birds, when they hatch from their shells, can recognize the chirp of the mother. Cadence is the first building block of learning. And to get a glimpse of what that cadence looks like, let's peek inside the spaces in between. This is not my dense array EEG. This is yours when you go to sleep at night. This is a normal EEG. All the rhythms and activities that the brain is recording as it seeks to bridge from potential mind when you're asleep to the actual mind to make the most of your actual mind when you awaken. Now, it looks great, doesn't it? But from the outside, what my parents find is that only a very limited interpretation is possible of all of that data. Because this is me, this is the coma I'm in. Level 3, I don't open my eyes, I make no sound, and I make no movement. That's a mild coma. 15 is the mildest, 3 is the deepest. I'm at the deepest level of coma for over a month. Usually at a level 3, you either don't wake up or you die within it. None of which I'm aware of at the time that I'm discharged home from the hospital. And here we will see how I look at the point I've been sent home after nearly 4 months at Cedars-Sinai. You can see the scar on the skull where they evacuated multiple hematomas and rescued my life. My eye, though, that you can see, is empty of thought. And I could talk more about that later, but I think the more important information I want to get to is the emergence of the different C's of consciousness as they unfolded. So as let's swing around to jump forward across a different kind of a space and time. to when I'm discharged from medical care. This is now several years later, and look at my eyes, the seat of consciousness. You can see in my eyes I've been designated a non-reader. I can look at a word on a chart, I can look at a letter on a chart, but I cannot absorb information at a functional speed. Let's look at what the Y of no looks like inside my head. This is a SPECT scan. This uses gamma radiation to build three-dimensional information that is functional about the brain. If we were in a clinic, you could see this in 3 dimensions, how absolutely beautiful it is. This is what the Y of no looks like with more than a third of the right side of my brain gone. So the next sea of consciousness after cadence that my family find in order to rebuild my ability to read is called cognitive training. And I get lots of emails about this. It's not widely available in Europe any more than it is in North America to adults. Let me give you a little bit of background about cognitive training, because at the point that it retrained me to read, I was able to read some of the research on this. As I experienced my recovery, all I'm aware of is that the doctors are only looking at the structure of the eye. Can you see in focus? If not, here are glasses. Are your eyes infected? In which case, here are drops. Now, I build up to hospital-strength prescription drops. At the point where my eyes are still erupting in infection, they look like Dracula eye. In my book, I call it Dracula eye. And then I happen to go, by pure chance, for one session of hyperbaric oxygen treatment, where you're put in a chamber at high-pressure oxygen, and my eyes the next morning erupt in every shade of infection imaginable. Just unbelievable. And I'm delighted. I'm delighted because I know that somehow that oxygen flushed everything through the eyes and emptied my skull of that source of infection. But the doctors tell me that that's not possible. The structure of the eye doesn't permit that. It's a sealed unit, which tells me that there are spaces in between that are not fully understood, because I can tell you that I've never had Dracula eye since then. Now, cognitive training is what goes behind the structure of the eye into the multiple processing of the information after it leaves the retina. It goes to about 20 areas of the brain. And it works and has an effect on my recovery and countless other people. Adults, remember, I'm 35 when this happens, because the mind redefines itself. And what I want to do now is show a little bit of the how of yes. First of all, a picture of what this is, the template this goes against, because this is scientific medicine. This is not invented medicine. This is a partial map of the learning processes. There are exercises, beginning, intermediate, and advanced, that can retrain each of these processes. When I did my reading, I find that about 30%, most people it's automatic, but 30% of children and 98% of people in juvenile detention have visual dysfunctions. This is actually how, as we go further in, the key point is that the assessments are individualized according to the level of learning. And this is what my specialist did with me. And now I'm just going to go straight to the how of yes. This is how I am, untestable in coma, discharged at 89. At 89, you touch average, there's average, you're done. At the point that I'm still a non-reader and unable to learn beyond what I happen to hear. This is where I reach at the end of cognitive training. The question, am I an anomaly? That's usually what happens. You're an anomaly, Simon. I've been called many things worse. Here's patient B, older, age 7 to 11, bearing in mind that the dogma is that at age 8, your functional IQ is stabilized or solidified. And here's somebody, ages 16 to 20, look at the right-hand bars. All I'm interested in is full-scale IQ before and after. And the first time I'm bringing patient D, and I'm bringing that here today, for one thing, this is called the average band, and you can see above and below, patient D still has neurologic issues. This is a bright kid who starts failing his tests at the age of 8. The big social picture, this year the numbers are just in, over 1 million children in America will not graduate from high school. At this point, it's 1 in 7 children in Europe. These children will grow up, marry, and have children, and they are ill-equipped. They have not even graduated from high school. The next sea of consciousness, which I learned, I still have headaches. My mind is firing, but I've got crushing headaches. 12 to 15% of the population have crushing headaches. I learned that 90% of headaches are the result of musculoskeletal imbalance, and I focused on craniomandibular alignment. The jaw is a unique structure in the body. I'm going to start with the issue of oral cancer, because I wanted to check, and my clinician checked with a high-definition cone beam CT. The research has been done in England, and this is why cancer, Oral and pharyngeal cancer are the 6th most common on the planet, and yet 80% curable if it's detected early, 50% mortality because it usually isn't. And this is why, as this starts to rotate, you're going to see how a tooth that looks completely healthy from the outside to the dentist looking inside isn't. And you're going to see cancer appearing. Something here that swings around. Now, NICE have established special protocols for reporting suspicious lesions. And this is why. Something is resorbing and denuding the bone here and here. That's a lesion, a malignant lesion, before it travels up the root into the sinus once it's in the brain, usually it's too late. This uses the same technology to show actually a different image. This is what an image looks like that saves a life. That's the malignant lesion before it enters the root of the tooth. So my clinician embarks me, having established I'm clear of oral cancer in the best way, on a process of moving my jaw into alignment so that the jaw can function properly. And this is what the images look like, and it immediately invites a consideration of the spaces in between. Look at all the detail that is possible to understand what has happened in order to move my jaw back into functional, adapted alignment. Again, this is showing graphically, look at that pinch space, there's a disc in there. If that pops out, ultimately you get osteoarthritis and you can't chew hard food. And here the concept is move back with a space in between where it belongs. This is using sound waves to verify the results. This is assessing muscle function because it's the irritated muscles that create the headaches, very typically. This is tracking the jaw as it moves through three-dimensional space. Here's a comparison before and after. Difficult to tell the difference. Try putting 1 grain of sand between your teeth and going for a walk. You'll spit it out. That's how critical this alignment is. And this image shows what's called a type 2 skeletal structure, very common in Europe. And on the left, see how it's protruded jaw, and on the right, it's been walked forward orthopedically to give relief to the joint. I still had headaches, though. Lucky me, I was one of the people outside that percentage. Circulation is the next C of consciousness, restoring circulation. If you get a splinter in your finger, you get pain and inflammation because there's an obstruction between the arterial and the venial flow. The blood can't get back to the heart to go around again. That increase in pressure works its way up through the thorax and into the abdomen, and it just keeps going up and up into the head, and it causes dilation. The brain has to expand, it can't, and you get crushing headaches. This technology established definitively that I had thoracic outlet syndrome. I've been told by 2 doctors that I didn't. This showed emphatically that I did. What are the consequences of obstructing this flow over the long term, the lifetime of our consciousness? I'm very grateful for the first time to be able to show these images comparing a young girl and an older man. This is what it should look like normally. This is an older man with a very serious issue in terms of brain atrophy. And you can't see anything, right? So I asked UCLA to put some highlight in. Look at the comparison of what's happened to this man's gyri, which are the grooves in the cauliflower of the brain. They're expanding, and that's a loss of brain mass, which is atrophy. To show a different perspective, these are all viewing the patient from the front, called the coronal view. Again, the same 2 people, but on the right, if you can see, this man is walking hunched. He's like a vulture. He's like this. That's how I would be standing, but for the neurostimulator and the removal of a rib on each side that restored the neurovascular flow. And here's the picture showing, highlighted to make it more clear about the degree of this gentleman's difficulties. The last image I want to show in terms of circulation is the lymphatics, because there are 200,000 cases a year of this. It's one of the more rapidly fatal forms of cancer, ovarian cancer. And in the US, the US Council on Preventive Services has just recommended against screening for it of healthy women. Too many false positives based on blood tests and ultrasound. But here, this is a minimally invasive lymphangiogram. Looking at this anatomy, you could know that there's some issue here. The radiologist would know there's an issue and would be able, and in fact, in this case, it was a case of tuberculosis. Why do I put this up? Because one of the barriers that I'm trying to overcome to make a program of mind care real is barriers to communication, which is the next C of consciousness. Now, there are different kinds of communication. There's cochlear implants to enable the deaf to hear, bionic eyes that are enabling vision, some degree of vision to the blind, and to allow the paralyzed to move, like the one that I wear. And my question today is, how will you reach into your community, to your families, to make the most of their consciousness? Because the next C of consciousness, in fact, the final one I'm going to talk about now, is consciousness itself. And that's not circular, because in this area, what we're talking about is the ability to think about our own thinking processes, which is very difficult to do. But as we advance down this path, as the long-term research starts to come in, and all being well, we're moving ahead of this tsunami of care that's going to destroy us otherwise, we're going to start edging towards full knowledge care. And full knowledge care will mean that we'll have a far greater grasp of how our minds work. But if we want to jump across in time to 100 years from now, we need to be acting now. And that's why I travel the world and make these presentations. Because we're going to start living longer. By 2050, first of all, a third of the children being born in England today are expected to live to 100. That's only part of the story, though. Before I left LA, I got a broker to quote me permanent life insurance. I said, take it out as far as you can. The insurance carrier sent me back premium quotes extending out for me to age 121. Industry is getting ready for this, but I see no sign that anybody else is in the healthcare system. What are we going to do when we have populations of people at the age of 50, 60, or 70 with dementia who have 80 years left to live? This is going to destroy us otherwise. It is a seminal question of our future. Because as we move forward, we're going to start piecing together these elements. We're going to understand these threads that make us who we are, these neural networks, neurobehaviorally, intrapersonally, and socially. And as we look into that future, those dawns that await us, the question I want to leave you with is, are we going to become a society where the needs of the elderly in mind overwhelm our young? Or are we going to redefine enlightenment in this century and beyond with three freedoms: the freedom of the mind from decay, the body from disease, and the freedom of the spirit from pain? Because today, and ever more so tomorrow, in all the tomorrows that await, the RSA Fellows and us collectively as modern societies are going to be able to help so many people wake each day to a new dawn and feel the sun rise and shine.